The American colony that vanished without a trace. Imagine arriving at an abandoned settlement. The houses are still standing. The belongings of the people who lived there are still scattered around. But every single person is gone. No bodies, no battlefield, no obvious signs of a struggle. And the only clue left behind is a single word carved into wood. CROATOAN. More than 4 centuries later, historians still don't know exactly what happened to the people who left it behind. This is the story of the Lost Colony of Roanoke. In the late 1500s, England was competing with Spain and other European powers to establish colonies in the Americas. One of the men determined to make England a colonial power was Sir Walter Raleigh. In 1584, English explorers reached the coast of what is now North Carolina and began investigating the region. They encountered indigenous communities who had lived there long before the English arrived. The English called the region Virginia, in honor of Queen Elizabeth I. Raleigh eventually sponsored attempts to establish an English settlement on Roanoke Island. The first attempt struggled. Relations with local indigenous communities deteriorated, supplies became a problem, and the settlement was eventually abandoned. But Raleigh wasn't ready to give up. A second colony would be different. This time, the goal wasn't simply exploration. It was settlement, a permanent English community. And in 1587, more than 100 men, women, and children crossed the Atlantic. Among them was a man named John White. He had been appointed governor, and traveling with him was his pregnant daughter, Eleanor Dare. On August 18, 1587, Eleanor Dare gave birth to a daughter. Her name was Virginia Dare. She became the first English child known to have been born in the New World. For the settlers, her birth represented something much bigger than the arrival of a child. It was a sign that this wasn't supposed to be a temporary expedition. They were building a new English community. But there was a serious problem. The colonists had not even reached their intended destination. They were supposed to establish themselves farther north, around the Chesapeake Bay. Instead, they were left on Roanoke Island. Their supplies were limited. Relations with some indigenous communities were already tense, and winter was approaching. The colony needed help. So John White made a difficult decision. He would return to England, he would bring back supplies and additional settlers. Then he would return. The plan sounded simple. It wasn't. John White sailed back to England in 1587. He expected to return quickly, but England was becoming consumed by a much larger conflict. Spain was preparing its famous Armada. English ships and resources were needed for the defense of England. The return journey to Roanoke was delayed, and delayed, and delayed again. The people on Roanoke were waiting, and John White was trapped an ocean away. Eventually, in 1590, White finally managed to return. 3 years had passed since he had left his family behind. He was desperate to see them, especially his daughter, and his granddaughter, Virginia Dare. But when White reached Roanoke Island, something was terribly wrong. The settlement was deserted. There were no colonists, no obvious signs of a battle, no bodies, no mass graves. The buildings had not simply been destroyed. Instead, White found evidence suggesting that the colonists had packed up and left. And then he discovered something even stranger. A message. Carved into a tree was the beginning of a word, CRO. And on another structure was the complete word, CROATOAN. White immediately recognized the name. CROATOAN referred both to an indigenous people and to a place associated with them, located south of Roanoke. Before leaving England, White had made an agreement with the colonists. If they were forced to leave Roanoke, they were supposed to carve the name of their destination into a tree or other visible object. And if they were in danger, they were supposed to mark the message with a distinctive sign. There was no such danger mark. That was one of the most important clues. It suggested that the colonists may have left voluntarily. White believed they had probably moved, perhaps to CROATOAN. But before he could investigate properly, disaster struck again. Bad weather forced him to abandon the search. He returned to England, and he never found his family. So where did they go? This is where the mystery becomes fascinating. There isn't one universally accepted explanation. There are several major theories. So what happened to the lost colony? Did the settlers die? Did they move inland? They travel south to CROATOAN? Did they join indigenous communities? This is history IQ, and sometimes the most fascinating part of history is what we still don't know.